Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Paul Church. I'm the Managing Director of Interquest. We're a tech, data, and digital recruitment business. And welcome to our webinar series. It's really been aimed primarily at our HR, staffing and talent professionals in our network, but certainly the topics we cover tend to be relevant to anybody really who's involved in running a team, a business, or involved in the processes within. Certainly I know I learn a lot from these sessions every week, so I'm very thankful to that. Today I'm live from our offices in Cannon Street, London, enjoying it while we can. Who knows what the world will look like next week, whether we'll be allowed, so enjoying the office today. As it stands, our meetup group is 462 members, and we're booked up with our webinars on a range of insightful and exciting topics now up until the 9th of December. So thank you for joining, sharing, viewing, and please do continue to do so. This group is all around looking after our businesses and using these conversations and topics to just hopefully make ourselves and our companies a little bit better, just a little bit. We've run a couple of webinars around looking after our workforce, sort of letting a late arriver in, looking after our workforce in terms of supporting health in the work, mental health in the workplace, and making sure that people are supported around their mental well-being. And I think today's topic falls somewhere in that same arena, a very broad arena, as we're going to be discussing enabling your workforce to do their best work. How do you get the best out of your workforce and allow them to be the best versions of themselves and create a feeling of psychological safety throughout your business? As always, I have recruited two top speakers to help us just dissect today's topic. So first of all, Steve Errey. Steve is a confidence coach for leaders and a hugely experienced freelance producer and project director, delivering high impact digital products and experiences for global brands. Steve is a confidence coach who works with leaders to build natural, effortless confidence. A coach since 2002, he continues to learn about what confidence is, what stops it, and how people can lean into their own confidence to help them do great work and lead naturally confident lives. He's been featured in Forbes, the Huffington Post, Fast Company, and Men's Health, covering topics from self-doubt to imposter syndrome to perfectionism, and has created the Confident Leader course to help people lead confidently. Steve also works as a freelance project director, regularly having to deal with the challenges of leadership, being a fresh face, easy for me to say, in established organizations and having to deliver in high pressure situations. Outside of work, he's in the last stages of writing his first novel, a big fan of street food, and is a huge Marvel geek. Steve, anything else to add there? And is there any, I suppose, a little bit about why this topic is so important to you personally?
I think, thanks for that. Lots of words. I mean, knowing how crazy it is out there right now, I think what better time to think about how people can show up and be at their best more of the time, especially when things are ever shifting and unpredictable. It's harder to do that, I think. So having some insight and tips and strategies around that seems to be a sensible thing to do. And yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to getting into some of the detail with you and Ellen.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve. Great to have you with us. Next, we have Ellen Bard. Ellen is a work psychologist, writer and consultant. She's on a mission to bring practical, useful and fun development suggestions and personal improvement ideas to those who are long on interest and short on time. A chartered psychologist, she is an associate fellow of the British Psychology Society and registered with the Health Professionals Council in the UK. She has published papers and spoken on topics including values in the workplace, engagement, the candidate experience in recruitment, psychometric tools, Generation Y, and employer branding. She has featured in several high-profile publications, including also the Huffington Post, The Guardian, BBC Radio 4 and the Financial Times, as a thought leader in productivity and the challenges of work-life balance in the modern, fast-paced, technology-enabled world. 20 years of consulting with organizations with issues including development, training, assessment, recruitment and coaching has given Ellen the experience and passion to bring you stuff that really works. She launched her first non-fiction book, This Is For You, a creative toolkit for better self-care, a beautifully illustrated workbook with 101 small experiments to help you flourish in all areas of your life in 2019. Away from work, she's written 3 novels and enjoys acro yoga with her partner Fox. Ellen, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And anything, I suppose, from you, anything extra there, and anything about kind of why this topic's so important to you, and also what is acro yoga? Because I don't know what it is.
Thanks very much, Paul. In terms of why it's important to me, it connects very much with self-care. So in order to be the best version of yourself, you have to take care of yourself. And I think the more that we see work bleed into all areas of our life, and physically bringing work into the home, which we're doing for most people now, as they're working from home, is a really good example of how that's happening. So I think it's a really critical topic for organizations to find the balance of getting the most from their people, whilst also nurturing them so they stay consistently productive over time, rather than burning them out. I've worked in about 25 countries now, and as you said before, I'm coming to you from Thailand, although I worked in London for 13 years. So hopefully I've got an interesting, to some degree, perspective on the global environment as well. And acro yoga is partner yoga, which involves some, I want to say acrobatics, but that makes it sound a bit more lively than perhaps I am, but it involves using a partner as a base and doing interesting things in the air.
Okay, all right. I will look it up after this, and perhaps there's a future webinar about acro yoga. Who knows? Who knows? So cool. So look, let's get started. So today, as always, I will ask questions for our speakers, but audience, please do jump in, put your hand up in the chat box if you'd like to ask something yourself, or put the message in yourself, and I can read it out, no problem. And if you feel comfortable, please do keep your cameras on so we can pretend that we actually are all in a room together. But if not, absolutely keep it off. That's fine as well. So first question. If we go straight back to you, Ellen, what is our best self at work, and what does that look like?
So from my perspective, it's bringing yourself to work and nurturing yourself in a healthy way. So emotionally, physically, psychologically, cognitively, where you can really fully engage in what you're doing, and fully engage with the people that you're doing it with, where you're aligned with both the business and the person. So you're aligned in terms of your values, your work, what you want to be doing. And also, you know yourself. So that's a really big part of it for me. So you know what you're bringing to the role, you're leveraging your strengths, you're managing your weaknesses, and you're bringing the best version of your own qualities to that role.
All right, just muted myself there. And Steve, how about yourself? What would you kind of say to that question?
I agree. I think best self and even authentic self, it's one of those terms that's bandied around a lot and can sound kind of trite and fluffy. And I don't like the trite and fluffy stuff. I'm not one for that particularly. But I think your best self is really just showing up as you already are, right? It's not pretending to be something you're not, or squeezing yourself into a box because you think that's what you need to be or ought to be or should be, or what you need to be to please someone else or tick a box or fit into expectations. So it's really just about that engagement, you know, showing up and engaging as you already are, feeling like you can bring the best of who you are. You know, you don't have to necessarily hide bits of who you are. It's strengths and weaknesses. We've all got light and dark, things we're good at, things we're not so good at. It's kind of just showing up with all of that and applying the best of what you've got.
Gotcha. Okay, makes sense. And Steve, I suppose, so how does this, if we're focusing on this, how does it help organizations, individuals, teams, and managers?
It's a good question. It's sort of the $1 million question, is why bother? And the counter question in my mind is, well, what's the alternative? You know, do you not want people to be the best versions of themselves or be their best selves? I don't like the alternative. It seems crazy to not want that for your organization or your team, or to want that for yourself even. You know, I think the more people are able to show up and apply their best without the need to fit in or tick boxes or fall in line with other people's expectations, then there's more innovation and creativity, and that's what organizations need right now. And it also allows, I think the more people are able to do that, the easier it is for great work to happen. And I think, I can't remember the guy's name now, the guy that made the I Heart New York symbol, you know, that sort of iconic symbol that's on all the tourist t-shirts in New York City. Milton Glaser was his name. He kind of designed that, and he came up with the concept of great work as work that has the capacity to move people, right? Or make a meaningful difference. And great work being distinct from good work or mediocre work. And I think the more people show up as they are and are able to be their best selves and apply their best, then that makes more room for great work to happen, right? It's all the time people are walled in to little pigeonholes or little boxes. You're preventing great work from happening.
Thanks, Steve. And Ellen, what would you add to that?
I think that's a great answer. And I think at an individual level, the more you know about yourself and the more you know that self that you want to bring to the workplace, which I think is a really critical part of it, the more you understand what you can bring to the workplace and the more you can offer the workplace. So if you come and you're fitting into the box, as Steve said, you're not necessarily bringing all the diverse skills and talents that you could also bring, those extra behaviors, which really make an organization flourish. And so from an individual level, you're able to bring more and, as Steve said, do great work. And from a organizational level, you're going to get much more diversity because you're going to be able to draw on not just the box that you want to fill, but ideally the person is going to be able to overflow that box and bring more interesting aspects, ideas, stuff from other parts of their life. And it's going to help them feel better, which is going to make them more productive. It's going to help quality and quantity. From a team perspective, if you understand the skills that you have to draw on, you're going to be able to put together a more effective team because you're going to be able to understand, okay, so what are the true strengths and development areas of the people in this team and how do we mesh them together in a really effective way? So it has, I think, huge benefits for organizations, for teams, for managers, because it's much easier to manage a real person than a person who's pretending to be something, but you know there's something not quite right because they're actually not that person at all.
Would you say in 2020, I suppose this topic has become more important as a conversation to be had, just kind of looking at the year we've had?
One of the things that I would think about in this context is the idea of best self in terms of peak performance versus sustainable performance. And one of the things that happens when we go into crisis mode is, a lot of stuff changes and we put a lot of pressure on people and ourselves to be able to manage that crisis. And you can get a lot more out of people in a crisis when that becomes the normal and the crisis becomes, well, actually, this is what we need from you all the time, then that's a challenge. So I do think that one of the things that this current crisis brings up is what is our best self in terms of peak performance versus sustainable performance? And they're not necessarily the same thing. And how do you make sure that you still give people the space that they need to rest, to break, to do different things so that they can sustain best self over time? I don't know what you think, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I say this to the people I work with as well, is nobody expects you to be at your best 100% of the time. Yeah. I know, my God, I'm not. It sounds exhausting. People have off days, people that have, downtime. People need to prioritize self-care, as Ellen said. The expectation that you should show up and be at your best and always do great work is simply unrealistic and unhelpful. So it's not about enforcing it or necessarily expecting it. It's about making the space so that people can do that within their own space. in ways that work for them and then will work for the organization. So it's kind of about doing more of what matters rather than doing box ticking. Funnily enough, I don't know if this is relevant at all, but you know how random thoughts pop in your head? I remember in the TV show Friends, and Chandler in his job, every year he had to work on the Weenus, which was this massive financial report, and no one knew what it was for or what it contained, but it would stress him out. And it was, you know, fundamentally pointless working on this Weenus. So and it would drive him crazy. So it's like, well, if it isn't what matters, why waste all that energy on doing it being your worst self, you know? Do what matters and focus that energy elsewhere.
I think there's also a piece on change, which is extremely relevant here. So in the organizations that I work with, I've seen the competency in some format or other of change a lot more in the last 5 years, maybe 10 years than 20 years ago. It's in like every competency model, and I'm sure most of the people on the call probably know it well, called lots of different things. And I think the need for organizations to support their people to be able to be more flexible in themselves, which is a personality trait, like it's not something that everybody has naturally, it's something that for some people will have to be developed, is very important. But there's also a piece around the organization helping with that change. And the metaphor I would use is the hermit crab. So the hermit crab, you know, discards his shell, is able to change and grow, but only if there's another shell there. And if the organization isn't able to provide that bigger shell, whatever you use that metaphor for, then there's nowhere for that hermit crab to go. So there's very much within this context of change, responsibility of both the organization and the individual to both flex and change together.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. So, so what are the points of friction between these different sets of needs? So workplace environment, relationships, individual capabilities.
There are many and numerous, and I think there are layers to that. I think points of friction in terms of the workplace itself or the sort of goals of the organization. I think often, you know, the culture of that organization can be a block to this sort of thing happening, whether that be in terms of the manner in which they do work. So they're inflexible, they're sort of very hierarchical, very top down, very sort of command and control. That isn't an environment that's set up for people to be at their best, right? That's about control and enforcement. So that's a clear point of friction that is systemic in a lot of places, and I'm sure we've all seen workplaces that are like that. I certainly have. So that's definitely one big area. I think another one is around the human need to control outcomes. Particularly when things are uncertain and when, you know, the bottom line is at risk, which, you know, for a lot of companies, that's true right now. Our sort of default go-to is, well, I need to control the crap out of this, right? I need to minimize the risk and maximize our chance for getting through, which is totally understandable. And a good, you know, it's common sense, I think, to do that to some extent. But that can turn into behaviors like micromanaging or creating anxiety within a team. You know, so there are ripples of that desire that can spread and become not necessarily toxic, but unwanted or unhelpful. So I would definitely look at falling into those traps of trying to or putting your energy into controlling the outcome through micromanaging and worrying and all those sort of more disabling behaviors.
Makes sense. Ellen, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think it links into this topic of psychological safety that we've been thinking about as part of the discussion, and psychological safety is essentially, do people feel comfortable taking risks and being able to be vulnerable in the organization? And the consequences of that, like if you can take risks, it means that you can make mistakes, you can speak up, you can be more creative than you might feel otherwise if, as Steve says, you're in this more command and control environment. It means you can have productive conflict, which is quite an interesting idea and quite terrifying to a lot of people, but that you can have healthy and productive conflict and disagree in a session without that becoming a problem. And you can have a blame-free culture. But those things, as the counterpoint to what Steve said, are very frightening for organizations. The idea that it's okay for people to make mistakes can be quite terrifying, especially if you're a manager and you're carrying the responsibility for that mistake. And so there's a real friction there between, okay, we want to create this environment of psychological safety so that we can reap these benefits, because there are many benefits associated with it as a construct. But there are some scary things that we need to do in order to make that happen. Plus, how do we train our managers who are used to saying, okay, do this thing and like, I'll come back to me in a week, to say, actually, you need to have a different interaction and a different approach with the people that you manage. So I think that would be one of the points of friction for me.
I think to follow on from that, if I can, Alan, as well, there's, I think a lot of organizations or teams can look at creating an environment of accountability and responsibility, which is a good thing, for people to own their work or own a project, or for a team to own something and be accountable for it. That's something that a lot of organizations are seeking to do. And that is great. I think people respond positively to that, to owning their stuff. The flip side of that, from a sort of human perspective, is that can come with an expectation of judgment and blame, right? It's like, well, if I'm responsible and accountable for this and it doesn't work out, what's going to happen? Am I suddenly going to get blamed or, singled out? So therefore, oh God, I better avoid that. So either I need to play it safe, not take risks and get through this, so that I'm not jeopardizing my position. It's either that, or I have to somehow just slippery shoulders get rid of this responsibility and accountability. So that can, that desire to create an environment of ownership can actually lead to behaviors that get in the way. So again, it's kind of understanding the ripple effect of what can happen when you're seeking to put this sort of thing in place.
Yeah, makes sense. And we've got a question that's come through on the chat box. I'll just read it out. So thank you, Sabine, for the question. Any others, please do pop them in. It's around the balance, really. So how can you create a performance culture whilst maintaining a psychologically safe environment? Steve, I'll ask you first of all.
How can you create a performance culture while maintaining a psychological safe environment? I think there's something about outcomes and method for me. So traditionally, organizations have been very focused on creating outcomes, right? They have a goal, whether that be a dollar amount or, selling X number of widgets, for example. And I think that can be useful in some regards, but it can divert people into the wrong kinds of behaviors, and it's been proven that sometimes if you've got a sales goal, let's say, people start to cut corners, or they'll start to, conduct themselves in ways that maybe aren't best for the organization, just in order to hit that goal. So it's really about having a sense of the direction of travel, which is a good and healthy thing to have, but making space for people to get there in their own way. And that space is about making room for experimentation. Let's try this for 2 weeks and see what happens. If it doesn't work out, we'll make a different choice, and maybe we can learn from that and try a different experiment. You know, in the world of agile development, which is what a lot of software houses use to create, you know, mobile phone apps. It's a very, or they embed experimentation into their process. So they'll have 2-week sprints of just trying stuff out, everyone piling in, collaborating, cross-discipline teams, and they see what happens, they learn from that, and they iterate. And they in very short time, they can create wonderful outcomes. So it's by shifting it more onto the method and less on a specific outcome that I think you can get a really good balance. And actually you can create some more meaningful and magical outcomes through that. Because you might stumble on a creative solution that wouldn't have been there otherwise. So I don't know if that helps answer.
It feels like a good answer to me. Hopefully it's a good answer to Sabine. Ellen, is there anything to add to that?
I think it's a great answer, and I would add to it the rewarding behaviors, inputs, rather than outputs, outcomes, and making that outcome either at a team level or a department level gives that freedom for people to be rewarded for putting the effort in, or putting number of sales meetings, or rewarding people on something that they can actually impact, rather than a measure that is not directly linked to their day-to-day, is also very useful in creating that. I think experimenting with the principles of psychological safety in something like a bounded event, like a meeting, is also a way that you can start practicing it. So you say, okay, so we're going to have this meeting. In this meeting, here are our ground rules. We're going to contract between us that we're going to agree to those, and we're going to experiment with this for half a day, and we're going to see how that goes. And that's our mini experiment. And then we can have a breather and reflect on it, and then try, rather than obviously command and control enforcing psychological safety. There's perhaps a bit counterproductive. So it has to come from bottom up as well as top down, this one.
Thanks, Ellen, and thanks for the question, Sabine. I hope that helped. She's nodding, so hopefully that's good. Andy Reid, hi Andy. Hope you're doing well. Good to hear from you. We've got a question from here. So Steve, I'll go to you on this one. Agile was developed as a way of working to bring the best out of a software development team. Central to this was working together in a self-contained team. So can this, I suppose, I think what Andy means is, can what we're talking about today, can this work with remote dev teams and now remote everyone?
Yeah.
There you go. Case closed.
I think, I mean, it does create a bit more, I don't want to use the word friction. I can't think of what the right word is, but it creates it's not as easy to build up momentum, I guess. But definitely, you know, I've personally run projects with remote teams in agile ways. So that's definitely an achievable thing. And I think, you know, given that we're on a Zoom call now from a variety of different locations, you know, this could be a call where we collaborate on a problem and try and see what we can do for the next 2 weeks to address that. You know, we could come up with some ways to experiment right here. So I think, you know, the tools that we've got definitely allow that to happen. And it's things like Zoom or Google Meets or Miro, or, you know, there are huge number of tools out there that allow this. The principles of agile and collaboration and experimentation are around communication and openness and transparency. And there are tools that can help that. So I think if you've got, you know, a clear definition in terms of ways of working, and you give people the tools to go for it, then yeah, people come together and do stuff that matters in ways that work.
Thanks, Steve. Anything to add on that, Ellen, around the agile and kind of working remotely in this manner?
Only and support people to use the tools, because I think in my, so obviously, I mean, not obviously, I'm not a tech person, but I work across lots of different industries, and there are some industries that I'm currently working with who are extremely comfortable with, okay, we're online now, no problem, and there are other people who just are struggling a great deal. The idea of them having to work and keep up with a WhatsApp group conversation and is like destroying their brains. And so you have to set some boundaries, and you have to teach people who might not be as comfortable with the tools that some people absolutely take for granted. Some people were using Zoom no problem anyway, to make sure that you don't lose your diversity by effectively giving a huge advantage to a particular section of your workforce who are already comfortable with those tools. So that would be the only thing that I would add as a non-tech person, as a psychologist rather than a tech person.
Cool, thanks, Ellen. Thanks for the question, Andy. Just, I suppose, any more questions, please do pop them in the box. Going back to kind of my line of questioning, so we touched on this a little bit earlier. So what can organisations do to help? What other things can organisations do to help create this kind of environment? Over to you, Ellen. I'll go back to you on this.
I think I would actually link back to that last question, which is the fundamental thing is make sure that people have the environment, the resources, and the tools for their job. And that's kind of a baseline. If they don't have that, if they don't really understand how they're supposed to use Zoom in this new world, if they don't really understand, how they're supposed to do something that they were very used to doing face-to-face through online means, then they're going to struggle, and they're going to be wasting time and definitely not being their best self. So that's the first piece. There's also something about having the resources to do the job. You can be as amazing as you like, but if you need a particular piece of software or something like that to do your job and your organization's not currently providing that, then that's going to make it difficult. I also think there's something about physical environment space, which is perhaps more relevant for non-COVID times, but different spaces in the workplace help us to do different types of work. So sometimes we actually need to be shut away in a meeting room. And I, as a consultant, I've been into hundreds of different organizations, and it is fascinating how much these days meeting rooms are always at a premium. And actually, some people find it very difficult to do deep work, productive work where they need to not be interrupted in an open plan office environment. And so you're not going to really be helping your team members to be their best self, to do deep work, if you're not providing them with that environment. So that's, I think, the first piece. I think having relevant for this group in particular is having the right HR processes. If you're not making sure that you're getting the right fit person for a role, if you're not using the right kind of techniques to get the right person into the role, and part of that is often upskilling the line to make sure that if they're involved in interviews, they're interviewing in a way that's consistent, all the things that we know are important. If you aren't offering development to your people so that they can grow, like I said earlier, I think that's very important. And I also think there's a big thing about the psychological contract. So the psychological contract being the set of unwritten expectations that we as an individual have with our organization. And we never really talk about, but they're assumptions that we make. And in that, communication is the biggest thing. Like, is the manager talking to the person to understand what they think they're supposed to be doing? Because if they apply their best self to the wrong problem, that's not going to help anyone. So that communication between employer and employee, usually via the manager, is also really critical.
Absolutely. And Steve, anything else about, I suppose, the role managers and leaders can play in this?
Yeah, I think the best way for leaders and managers to kind of help this along is to show it and demonstrate it rather than tell, right? Again, it's not command and control. And I think we've probably all known leaders and managers who have a sort of do what I say, not do what I do approach, which doesn't quite work. And the leaders who stand out for me, if I think back to sort of my career past, the leaders who stand out as being amazing or doing great work are the ones who have a kind of congruity about who they are and the manner in which they do that work. You know, they don't try to be something they're not. They are open and honest and transparent with the people in the organization and the team. And I use the word congruent quite deliberately. There's a sense of flow to them that comes from figuring out their own stuff, and being okay in an environment where there are layers of expectations. So I think definitely showing, not telling, is a big piece. And also, and I kind of come back to, I think the book's up there somewhere. There it is. Yeah, pink, which is around autonomy, mastery, and purpose, which is really creating an environment where people in the team, people in the org, can have autonomy over the work they do. They can achieve mastery over the way in which they do it, and they have a sense of purpose, you know, the reason for doing it. And people respond incredibly to those three elements, or autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So just being aware of that on a day-to-day basis, you know, even in terms of how work is prioritized or fed out to different people or teams, how work is controlled and how work is then sort of hands off for that stuff, and you know, to allow the team to get on board and to get their hands dirty in it. Those three elements are key, and again, they have to demonstrate that stuff. You know, if a leader demonstrates autonomy, mastery, and purpose, that will flow out. So that's a big part of it, I think.
And Steve, are there any other things that I suppose get in the way of us being our best self?
Heaps. I think, again, kind of coming at it from an individual level, which is you know, where I come at it from in my coaching work. There's a big need for people to feel like they fit in and are accepted. You know, that need to fit in and belong is inherent in who we are as human beings. Anytime we're you know, going into an environment with other people, we have an innate desire to fit in and not be judged, blamed, or rejected. And it's that fear of being judged, blamed, and rejected that create a lot of issues and problems. And these are the things that get in the way of an individual being their best self. So if you think about it, you know, let's say you go into a new job on day one, right? A new building, a whole new team, a whole new organization. You don't know what people expect. You don't know the personalities around you. You don't know, you know, the command and control type, or the, you know, the kind of workplace culture it is. So you're going into a big unknown, and there's a lot of uncertainty and risk. And the urge then, or the fear of being judged, blamed, and rejected will make you want to play it safe, or, you know, I'll just kind of keep my head down, do my work in a safe kind of way and try and get through. And if you're not careful, that can lead into behaviors like people pleasing, or like perfectionism, or like imposter syndrome. You know, those behaviors that really short circuit your self-confidence, short circuit your ability to show up in meaningful ways. So there are so many layers. I could talk for hours about that. But yeah, there are a heap of behaviors that get in the way of that.
And Ellen, are there anything that leaps out to you, leaps to mind for you?
I would add in to the fit piece, often organizations are very comfortable recruiting on knowledge, skills, and abilities, the idea of like, what is the job? Can the person do the job? But I think the fit piece around culture and values is super critical. So if you're in an organization and you don't resonate with the values of the organization, or you don't feel like you fit into the culture, that's also going to impact on your comfort with being your best self, and indeed lead to those potential feelings of judgment or criticism. And I also really would highlight the criticality of the manager role in this piece. For the individuals in an organization, that the manager often is the organization. They're the person, especially first line managers, who most people see as, you know, they represent to them the organization. And helping them and supporting them and training them to understand that there's so much more that they can do with their team members than just do a yearly performance appraisal. I also do a lot of coaching like Steve, and I ask quite regularly, have you ever asked your team members, how can I get the best from you? How can I work most effectively with you? And it is fascinating to me how gobsmacked the people are at the concept that they would ask the person how they might like to be managed. But that it ties in perfectly with autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and is very empowering to the person, and really shows them that the manager is interested. So I feel like investing in managers and really helping them to understand that pivotal role they play is something that the organization sometimes doesn't always do as well as they could.
Yeah, makes sense. And how else to, I suppose, Ellen, how do employees sometimes get in their own way, and how can they help themselves, would you say?
We've definitely talked about quite a lot of the challenges that all of us have as humans in terms of things like perfectionism, and the many other pieces of baggage that we carry with us from our personal life into our workplace life. I think one of the things that we could, all of us, continue to do better is knowing ourselves better. The more you know about yourself, the more you know what is it that you bring to the organization and where might you need to flex. Because absolutely, there's no ideal organization for any of us. We all need to flex and grow and develop in some ways. And for example, if you know that you are an introvert and you are going to be in a lot of meetings, and you're finding it quite difficult to talk on the fly, which often introverts do because they prefer from their style to prepare in advance, then you can talk to your manager or to the person running the meeting and say, is it possible to get a heads up about the topic so I can just do a bit of thinking beforehand? And that's a straightforward way of knowing more about yourself, knowing what would help you, knowing what would give you the opportunity to be your best self in that meeting, and talking to your manager about it.
Absolutely. Steve, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think in terms of what an individual can do to help themselves, I part of it is around noticing. I think just noticing some of the patterns of thought that happen in our own heads, that might lead us down a path of wanting to please people or seek perfection, or even that we're an imposter. So it's just gently noticing those patterns of thought that might not be serving us well, because that affords us then an opportunity to try things a different way that might honor our full selves, our best selves. There's also something in there about vulnerability. I think, if you think of that person on day one of a new job, they're going to be feeling a bit scared and vulnerable, which is perfectly natural. So it's not turning vulnerability into a problem or a drama, right? And that it doesn't have to be as big or as significant as day one on a job. It could be just going to a meeting where there's a big personality, or where there's someone more senior in that meeting who might be a little intimidating, or suddenly there's you've got to ask a question in a meeting, or it's your turn to talk. That vulnerability is okay. It's part of the human experience, and it doesn't need to be a problem. Doesn't need to be turned into a drama. If you think about it, no one has done everything. No one has all the answers. No one has solved every problem. No one has done every job or run every project so we're all in the same boat. We're all trying to do our best in challenging circumstances. So I think just making it okay to be vulnerable and knowing that that's not about your value or worth is, for me, a really big thing.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. And we've got this has been a really insightful conversation. We'll try and summarize it in a sec. There's a few comments and questions that have come through in the chat, so I'll just go to these before we kind of wrap up. So, Steve, so from Sabine, it's more of kind of a comment. There's a model from Ryman Thomas, the Ryman Thomas cross, that is great to have a better understanding of how team members are and their personalities. Very helpful to learn how they would like to be managed. Are you familiar with this?
I haven't heard of that. There's a good chance that Ellen may have come across it, but
I actually haven't. Which is interesting. What's the dimensions?
Yes, hi. So the dimensions are interaction and autonomy, and then it's literally a cross. And then on the one side is in the interaction, people that like closeness and contact, and on the other side, if they like distance and independence. And on the vertical axis, you would have stability and order and change and flexibility.
Okay.
And you can ask people to like put themselves in where they think they are and what they have the need for, what have they the fear of. And then you can also ask the colleagues to say, okay, where do you think that person is? What do they need more? And that's a really way to understand that, okay, is this person, do they need more distance and independence, or is this someone that you need to keep track of? And yeah,
I think that's not one I'm familiar with, but it sounds like introversion, extroversion, change, stability, as you say. And I think any of the personality models that you can use are super useful, as long as they're validated and got some robustness to them. But in general, I think they're a good way to get to know yourself and to share that self with your team. Great. Thanks, Sabine.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Sabine. Go on, Steve.
I would kind of, I think, I kind of think models in some way, and I agree, if there's a model that seems useful or has utility, great. But I think they're always a placeholder for a conversation. So, you can never define someone fully by a model. So it's that might help you get a foundation or some context, but it should always be a placeholder for a conversation that's more human, I think.
Thanks, Steve. In fact, thanks, Sabine. I had a question that came through on the private chat, so from hearing, so I'll assist you, Ellen. Ellen, are there any companies that do have the balance right to perform well and also be comfortable with the work required? And what have they done that's enabled this that others might want to implement?
What a super interesting question. Okay, so yes, I think the bigger the organization is, the more challenging it can be, particularly dependent on level of bureaucracy, because I think that gets in the way of a lot of this stuff. I think that without naming organizations, because I don't think that's appropriate, but if I think about the organizations who perhaps have done this really well, they're often values-based organizations. And when I say that, I mean, when I go in and work with them and I say to a frontline person, what are the values of the organization? They can name them like that, like straight away, no problem. They're like a stick of rock cut through. And they can name examples of what it means to live those values. And I think that's very empowering for organizations. Where it doesn't work so much, or where you don't see it so much, is where the values are on the wall. And people, I have been to organizations where I've gone to do discussions about values and said, what are your values? And they say, do we have values? No idea. And obviously that's less powerful. So there's something about values which are different from job criteria, that at an organizational level give people that sense of purpose that we were talking about, and mean that the person is really invested in wanting to do their best for the company. So it's that connection with the bigger organization that enables them to blossom. And obviously there's lots of stuff around providing development, providing appropriate remuneration. I mean, there are some basic terms and conditions stuff that I think are quite important, providing the right environment, but that values piece in the organizations that I've worked with seems to be something that can really create success in this area.
Cool, thanks, Ellen. And Steve, anything to add there?
No, I think values, I absolutely echo what Ellen said. Values are really important, and values shouldn't be picked from a dictionary or a thesaurus. You know, those posts on the wall, we've all seen them and they sound great, and they're what organizations think they ought to be or ought to have. But there can be a massive disconnect between what's on the wall and the way in which they conduct themselves. So I think it's really looking at, the way I would go about it is looking at the big successes of that organization or the team and saying, well, what values were present that allowed that to happen? So actually look at what values are being demonstrated in your teams and have and reflect those upwards. Because those are the values that are actually there, working, living and breathing.
Yeah, makes sense, absolutely. And Oliver Carson, Oliver, I know you put the question in twice. Apologies, I was working my way up rather than working my way down, but we're certainly going to get to you. So Oliver is a university grad who is keen to work in HR, and he's asked, given the limitations of a top-down bureaucracy, what are people's opinions on having horizontal as well as vertical career progression like a lattice? How well does this work in practice for those who have seen this? Steve, you got any insights into that?
I'm probably not best placed to answer that. But I think, I mean, just off the top of my head, I think if it's what means something to that individual, if it's a lateral move or a diagonal move, if it allows them to stretch their wings or grow or stretch or do more of what they like or do more meaningful or more work that's meaningful for them, great. Why not do that? You know, put people in places that serve them and the organization well. Yeah, that's off the top of my head.
Yeah, no worries. And Ellen, anything on Oliver's question? Any thoughts on that?
I would connect it back to the psychological contracts. So what are the expectations that you've set with the people who are in the organization? So I think this can work really well, but it only works well if the expectation of the organization is that one of the things that we do at this organization is we gather new experiences that we can bring to our, if we do want to eventually move up, part of the expectation is that we gather these experiences from different places. And that's part of job enhancement, role enhancement, or just person enhancement. If the organization is very driven by the only way to be successful is up, then it feels very demotivating to be, the term is moved sideways. That's actually what people call it. So that's less helpful. So the question is, what does your, what psychological contract have you set with the people that you are working with? Do people feel that this is a beneficial thing? Is it part of the unwritten rules of the organization that, yep, that's what we do here. That's not a problem. That's not seen as a shameful thing or as a bad thing.
Perfect, thanks. And Oliver, I hope that helped. Oliver, we're actually next week, Oliver, this is just we've got a you might be interested in having a look at, and if you want to give me a managers, you might be able to give you some advice as well. Thanks guys, good answers. Thanks, Oliver. Cool, so let's try and wrap up this this discussion. If I ask both of you, kind of Steve and Ellen, if we try and go back to kind of one thing which our audience can do or try and apply. So one thing for organizations and one thing for individuals. Ellen, how would you, what would be the biggest takeaways for you?
For the organization, I would say start with a culture of constructive feedback. So educate your people to be able to both give feedback and receive feedback. And this helps in a myriad of ways. It helps people get to know themselves better. It helps to promote trust. It helps to promote empowerment. It helps upskill people. But you really, in my experience, have to help people both give it and receive it, because taking feedback is not an easy thing for people, but it has huge benefits. So you can start that by getting people to send an email after a project which says, what did I do well and what could I do better? Like, that's the kind of really basic level building block of creating a culture of constructive feedback.
Perfect. Thanks, Ellen. And Steve, one thing, or I suppose it's two things, isn't it? One thing for organisations and one thing for individuals. What would you summarise?
Yeah. So I think for organisations, for me, it's about coaching leaders to trust, rather than control, right? And to kind of get that balance away from the control and micromanaging and dictating outcomes to trusting people to figure that stuff out in the ways that work. So, and that can be a gentle kind of shift. It's not an overnight thing, but I think coaching and supporting leaders to nurture that is a good and healthy thing. And for individuals, for me, a really simple tool, and it's something I use from time to time as well, is around permission. So a lot of individuals and employees think they have to do things a certain way or be a certain way in order to fit in and tick those expectations. But if an employee or an individual gives themselves permission to be vulnerable, or to do their best and have that be enough, or to be imperfect, or to have to speak up honestly, and you can actually get a Post-it note and a Sharpie, right? And actually write, I give myself permission to ... and then put that on your monitor or put it in your pocket. And it can be a way of just cutting through some of that unhelpful thinking and behavior that might get in the way and hold us back, or urge us to be safe or play it safe. So giving yourself permission to just show up is a powerful thing.
Fantastic. That's a powerful way to end. Thank you very much, Steve. And thanks, Ellen, for being with us for this hour. Thank you for everyone who's joined. So next week, as I mentioned, we're going to be discussing the future of HR. What has 2020 changed about that position? What does it look like moving forward? So excited about that one. But yeah, thanks everyone who joined. Steve, Ellen, can't thank you enough. So yeah, thanks everyone. See you all next week.
Pleasure. Thanks very much, Paul.
See you, everyone.
Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.